Hey kids, today I wanted to do a little video. I had a commission that I'm working on. It's Marvel Crisis Protocol, so it's all the Marvel superhero stuff. And the client had asked me about the basing so he could match his stuff that I don't wind up doing with that, or if he has another painter do it, that they could kind of have a pretty uniform look. So I sent him the color list, but he had asked me to do something a little more in depth, and I wanted to do a video for him, but I figured I'd share it with everybody so that you guys could check this out. So the bases themselves are city bases. I don't find it to be a particularly interesting setting in general, just because you don't really have any like bounce lights that are interesting. And it's kind of the way that I've been painting in the last year is that, you know, whatever my setting is, I've got those bounce lights coming up into my shadows. So, you know, my 40K stuff is all in this kind of jade green marble type, and that's obviously very reflective, so you'll get kind of a cool green shadow that comes up. Or alternatively, you know, any kind of like lighting from the bases. I've been doing that a lot. With the city bases, you really just have concrete and you have a little bit of metallics from like grates, and I do those maybe a little overly exaggerated, but for the most part, you're on the street. So, you know, you don't really get much of an interesting color situation going on. You can do some creative things. You know, you can add newspapers, you could add, you know, the packs themselves come with little Coke cans or coffee cups. So you can add litter to the street, but again, I don't know how much it adds narratively to being like, you know, this dynamic battle of good versus evil, and there's a fucking Starbucks cup sitting on the street. So personally, I think that they're a little boring. I do think you could do fun stuff with them, but ultimately, I tried to approach it knowing that it wasn't gonna be super colorful, and so I added with my color choices a little bit of something, and in particular the gray that I picked for the streets being P3's Gray Coat Gray. P3 are wonderful colors. If you've never tried them, they're fantastic. At least they had been in previous times when I'd used them. This is a very blue gray, so that allows me to cheat a little bit and get a little bit of blue going on in the scene. Now again, because of how dynamic the range is and how big the variety of characters is, you don't always want blue on the base. And that's color theory stuff. If you're not thinking about that and you don't give a shit, then that's fair. But obviously that's kind of where my head's at these days. But outside of all that, the color list for you guys is that Gray Coat Gray. That's gonna be your base. You're gonna bring it down with, I'll use the Chimera Carbon Black. I actually think it's maybe a little too powerful just because it's got so much pigment in it, they kick so hard. But any black will do. And then you're gonna bring it up with Vallejo's Ghost Gray. Again, any lighter gray will do. You could even do white here. I would just caution that, again, it's gonna bring it up pretty substantially and quickly. So just caution that. And then just for some extra effects and some extra, you know, color and dinginess on the base, GW's Argax Earthshade and Null Oil. And at the end of the video, you're gonna see a little bit of Ard Coat put in there. And now I'm noticing, if you're noticing that how glossy I am, it's because I just got out of the shower and there's beard oil on my lips, so forgive me for that. But in any case, there is some footage here for you guys, and I'll do the voiceover like I normally do, and if you have questions or anything you want to talk about with it, feel free to message me or comment on the video. So check it out. Moving right along here, we've got our palettes. The palette that I'm using is the Redgrass Games, their Everlasting Wet palette. This is the V1, but you'll see obviously the footage is sped up here, and I'll apologize in advance for the frequency at which things drop out of frame, but we'll work on that in the future. Obviously our mid-tone there being the base coat, that Gray Coat Gray, we're gonna mix up, we're gonna mix down, so I've got a you know, plethora of options to grab from as we go. This is gonna help us, you know, save some time by just being able to grab the paints and move on. So looking at our base here, there was a big error in the priming process because I sprayed in the base coats where the light is coming from a different direction than it wound up hitting the model. So we're gonna have to go in and fix that, and you can see the shadows on the wrong side where the light should be kind of hitting it. So we're gonna slap some paint on there and fix it pretty quickly. Now you'll see I'm kind of chunking in those paints. You know, you can slap on those higher highlights and just blend them back in. And that's a lot of how I do my highlights these days, is kind of broadly stroke in those highlights and then bleed them back. So it's kind of a two brush method, being that, you know, normally when you use the two brush method, you have one with paint on it and one with, you know, just kind of using water or spit to kind of bleed it out. But I just use one brush, and it just, as you can see, kind of stipple back, stretch it back, and then kind of jump, but you'll see that those, you know, you'll get a much smoother blend as it goes on. Now, this is just me blacking the base rail. I think it's just an important thing to note that you will get a much different perception of your model with a white base rail if you've primed them white. So at a certain point, it is very important to go in and do this just to get, you know, kind of a better look at what you're actually gonna get as a final product. And I used to use this as a reward, like when you finish the model, then you do the blackout, and it felt so good. But nowadays, I feel like it's important to, you know, kind of utilize it as a tool to get a better perception of what you're going to get in the end. And using that pure black, I'm just creasing out all the lines, all the cracks in the base, just so that we've got a very dark area there. Now, switching brushes here, we've got dry brush from Artist Opus. So obviously you're going to load that up like any normal dry brush, take a paper towel or something and whip off some of that paint. I think there's like a lot on there when I do this, so obviously I use my thumb to get quite a bit off. But here you're going to get some great textures. You can also get some smooth blending. I'm not a master at this. There's people that are much better. I'm still learning this technique, and the stuff that people do with it these days really blows my mind, because I'd written it off for years and years, but after picking these up, I feel much better about kind of messing around with it. So now, after I feel like I'm at a point where I'm looking pretty good, I want to come in and really iterate where the light's coming from. So using purely Ghost Gray, we're going to crack in on the edge of the base there. You also want to come in and do where the light would be catching on the edges of the bases, do some scratches and stuff, reiterate those cracks on that big step there. Is going to get one you'll see in a minute here. But going in and using our washes, just want to reiterate on these cracks and crevices. And as much as I've got to say about I don't like the setting, the bases are incredibly well sculpted. There's a ton of detail there, and they're really wonderful for what they are, personal preference aside. So just kind of putting a little bit of dirt in there, and if you look at city streets, they're dingy, they're yucky, they're gross, there's crap all over, and I wanted to go with dirty. I spent a lot of time in Chicago earlier this year, and I wanted to kind of utilize what I'd seen to create a scene with it. So again, apologies for it being off frame half the time. We'll work on it in the future, but just kind of going back in and getting those edges even after that last little bit of washing. You can do some cool stuff with those washes too. I like to do oil spills with them. I did a little oil spill on Valkyrie's base. I thought it was pretty cool. So just looking at the base there, comparing with my original tester, and that's got powders on it, so it's going to look a little different, but for the most part, I felt like it needed a little more blending, which you'll see there, and then final product. So Danny himself isn't done yet, but we've got some images here. I'm pretty happy with the product as it is, and hope that this was helpful to you guys, a little bit of insight into the approach on the bases.